one more minute for his agenda.
I want to welcome you to the Housing Committee, November 2nd, 2016, here in the city of Los Angeles, up on the 10th floor. What's the room number here?
1060.
1060. Okay. We're going to begin with public comment. We have new rules that have been put in place. Those rules are: if you speak on multiple items, you get 2 minutes in total, and you get 1 minute for public comment. So the maximum total will be 3 minutes, and so that's what we have available for each and every one of you. Before we do that, I want to welcome a new member to our committee, Councilman Paul Koretz, who is a good friend of mine and a former colleague both here and in the state legislature. He's got an extensive history and knowledge of housing and homelessness, having served both in this body of the city of West Hollywood, and in the state legislature. In his office, he's done work with people assisting the homeless and creating shelters and services. He is a very stalwart of the liberal community of the city of Los Angeles, a strong proponent of community-based solutions, and a advocate for unions and coalitions and comprehensive solutions to the many challenges that confront us. He is the darling of the animal rights community, and he has a stellar record in being a good person for all good things. So, Mr. Kretz, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so let's start with public comment. If we can, Herman, please come up. You've got 2 minutes.
Is this general public comment or multiple?
This is multiple.
Okay, 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Now that we're speaking about item 3, since it's multiple item venue here, as you heard regarding development or affordable housing, we have a 72-unit Seabreeze project gone wild. Allegations of ferocious bribery and padding our wallets with...
Are you on?
On 3, sir. You said multiple. I'm on 3. Did I speak English or am I in the wrong country? What item, ma'am?
To be on topic, the CP's apartment complex is not part of item 3.
No, ma'am, but I'm going to defer my questions to regards to housing projects. Number 3 is development for affordable housing. So don't interrupt this nigga. I know what I'm doing. I'm going back to my problem. The problem is about development. Development is not affordable. You know that. Hey, why are you filming me like that, bro? Why don't you pay attention? That's the reason why at Plum last night you put me only for 2 fucking goddamn minutes. You and that other poverty pimp, Weezer. Now let me stay on topic. Oh, anyways, I don't want to speak on number 3 number because, you know, you niggas don't care about affordable housing. You never cared. I've been homeless since 2008, God damn it. 2008, because I was kicked out of my so-called rent-controlled home by the city of Los Angeles, poverty pimp niggas. That's why I talk about development regarding item number 3. No one gives a fuck. Veterans are in the street, women and children in the street, and I'm in the street, goddammit. For how many years? You do the calculation and the math. So fuck you all. On behalf of the public's interest, on behalf of every motherfucker who's homeless, I'll say to these motherfucking poverty pimps, I got 7 seconds, sir. 6 seconds, 5. Fuck you all. Because you fuck with people's lives too much. Do your goddamn fucking job.
You're done.
No on HHH.
You're done. You're done. And we're not going to tolerate your noise making. Herman, I want to let you know that. If you continue, you'll be asked to leave. Okay, thank you. Take them after. General public comment now? Well, sir, you get another opportunity. Every minute, a moment, an opportunity to do what's right. You get an opportunity to speak again on public comment. 1 minute.
So you heard, folks. These are poverty pimps run our city. Vote no on Measure M, because Eric Garcetti, you're a fool. Second of all, vote no for Janice Hahn, because she was on council before, and she took bribes. I'm on public comment, you said. General public comment.
General public comment as it relates to housing.
Well, I'm talking about the poverty pimps who were involved in the Seabreeze project out there in San Pedro. All you white niggers with robes like this hoodie I wear. Because you know you take advantage of the public. That's why Dawson has to film me. Because I'm speaking the truth about you, Janice Hahn. Vote no. Steve Napolitano, all the way.
Seconds.
I got 20 seconds, nigga. And I'm going to talk about people because you're poverty pimp Crips taking away from the public. Putting African Americans in the street. Putting Hispanics on the street because of your development. Stick it up your ass, motherfuckers. On behalf of the public and my concern for every public motherfucker, don't vote no on any 17 goddamn fucking measures.
Time's up. You're done. Thank you. Okay, we'll go to item 1. Now we can move beyond the circus. We've got item 1.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, item 1 is appointment of Ms. Alexandra Zandueta to the Commission for Community and Family Services.
Yes. Ms. Andueta, how are you?
Good.
I hope we haven't discouraged you.
Maybe just a tad bit. Yes, it's part of all of it.
You are the appointee for the Commission on Community and Family Services. We welcome you, and why don't you take a minute or two to tell us about yourself?
All right. My name is Alexandra Zandueta, and I currently work for 5 Acres Boys and Girls Club as the interim CFO, as well as the Director of Business Performance and Financial Analysis. My career in accounting and finance spanned about 17 years. The last 6 years of that was dedicated to working for specialty children's mental health providers, and I really love what I do. Really passionate about really making a difference and enriching the lives of children and families that we serve across Los Angeles through the promotion of safety. I do feel like safety always comes first. And second, being able to provide really permanent and loving homes for some of our kids, especially our foster children. And third, really just enhancing the well-being of the children and families that we have in the underserved communities here in Los Angeles. I feel like and I'm just really passionate about what I do, and I hope to be able to serve in a really larger capacity. So this is a really great opportunity for me to kind of have a voice and advocate for children and families. So thank you.
Any questions? Mr. Kretz? Yes.
Yeah, you seem to have an excellent background for this position, so I'm excited about it. I do have one question. The Commission has a number of roles. One of them is to provide the public with an opportunity to have input on the city's consolidated plan for allocating CDBG funds. And that's obviously crucial to social services, where you've had obviously some background. Have you ever participated in that process? And do you have any thoughts on how we could make that more effective in terms of drawing in the public for input?
You know, I have not participated in any of the work groups that, that has within that topic. So in terms of thoughts and allocation of funding, I do believe there's a great need of funds for children and families here in Los Angeles. I mean, I work for a mental health provider, and I see that every single day. And coming from a provider side, it is a challenge to be able to manage resources to provide the demand of services that is needed from us. And as legislations and new, health acts are being passed, we feel some of the pain in that sense. So I really want to be able to, again, advocate strongly in this position to make sure that we maintain, adequate resources to serve our communities in Los Angeles for children and families.
Well, thank you for your willingness to take on this role, and look forward to working with you.
Likewise, thank you.
Mr. Aristotle? Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for
Thank you.
wanting to do that. Motion to accept?
So moved.
Second. Any objection? So will be the order. Next item.
Mr. Chair, would you like to take item 2 and 4 together?
We would.
Item number 2 is the City Attorney Report Ordinance relative to providing a tenant buyout notification program. And item number 4 is the HCID and CAO report relative to the enforcement of LS provisions of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance.
Aye.
Good afternoon, council members. Anna Ortega with the Housing Department, Director of Rent Stabilization. On item 2, today we are here to review the ordinance language written to implement the tenant buyout program, which we were directed to do by the council. Over the past several years, as the housing market has improved, we've seen an increasing trend in tenants who are offered cash for keys agreements by their landlords. And so this program is designed to ensure transparency and full disclosure to these tenants so that before they accept an offer, which this does not impede the ability of the landlord and the tenant to agree to a tenant buyout agreement, but it would require that the tenant be fully informed that they don't have to accept one, what the legal amounts of relocation assistance required under the RSO are, and that it provides them with an opportunity to rescind the agreement of 30 days. This would allow tenants the time to maybe come to the housing department or consult with an attorney or get counsel from a tenant right or lawyer. The program would allow the tenants 30 days to rescind it, and they would also be able to rescind it indefinitely if the landlord doesn't provide the disclosure that's required under this new ordinance. So the city attorney has written the proposed language to implement this, so we're hoping that you will approve the new program.
Good afternoon. Emily Zen Cervantes with the Office of the City Administrative Officer, and I'm here to speak on item number 4, which is requesting revisions to the rent stabilization ordinance. Our office is in agreement with David's recommendations. I do want to note, though, that there's a request that council adopt one of the following recommendations. It's either recommendation number 3 or recommendation number 4. They are in regards to amending the replacement revisions in the rent stabilization ordinance. They both ask that property owners execute execute and record a regulatory agreement for the term of at least 55 years and housing accommodations for those at or below 80% area median income. The difference between the two is that one is asking for a 1-for-1 replacement of RSO units with affordable housing units. The recommendation number 4 is asking for at least 20% of the total newly constructed rental units to be affordable housing units. And there is no impact to the general fund.
Would you like me to discuss the Ellis number 4?
Sure.
Yes, okay. So on April 20th, the Housing Committee was presented with our report on the Ellis situation. This report combined several motions dealing with various recommendations to improve the processing and monitoring of Ellis evictions and close some loopholes that have become apparent in the processing of Ellis applications. As the economy has improved, again, we've seen a trend where we're receiving more of these kinds of evictions. So we've prepared a report that responds to all of these motions and reports back on the status of Ellis in the city of Los Angeles. We had broken down what's happened with the properties removed from 2010 through 2014 and what their status is. And as a result, we have 8 recommendations before you that would provide for improvements in the way the RSO addresses Ellis removals. So these include the provisions for replacement housing for newly constructed units. Also that vacant units must still be removed from the rent stabilization ordinance. The ordinance should explicitly state that. We also find situations where property owners remove them through the Ellis process and then start renting them again. In order to legally do that, they're supposed to file a re-rental application, but oftentimes this doesn't happen. So one of the recommendations would make it clear that re-renting units that have already been removed would nullify that initial application, and they would have to refile to remove them. Also, we find that the Ellis process can take a long time as the construction goes on or funding is secured. So it can go over several years. We're recommending that property owners file annual status reports. For demolished properties, we have also found that some people have demolished RSO units without doing any of this. So if that were to be the case, the ordinance should explicitly say that landlords must file an application to remove them. It is practiced, but it's not in the ordinance, that when landlords remove them, that the housing department files constraints that apply to successor landlords in interest. That is already the practice, and they're required. The landlords themselves are required to file these constraints, but the housing department does that also. So we think that it would be better if the ordinance explicitly gave the department the authority to do that. Also, the state ALICE provision itself says that units in residential hotels cannot be removed. The Los Angeles ordinance does not currently say that, so we want to bring them into agreement there. There's also a provision that allows tenants to waive relocation when there's a conversion for condominiums, and they're told ahead of time prior to renting that there's already an application on file to subdivide or convert to condominiums. We do get these from time to time, and so those tenants, when they sign that agreement, waive their rights to relocation assistance. But the city, when we adopted our ALICE provisions, instituted a program for assistance in finding replacement housing. So even though tenants have waived their rights, we're recommending that those tenants that have lived in those rental units for at least 1 year, that they should still be entitled to relocation services. So they wouldn't be entitled to the $7,800 to almost $20,000 in relocation funds, but they would be entitled to services from the city's relocation provider. And then finally, the CAO referred to this one. For units that are put back on the rental market, or for units that are demolished and there's new construction at the same place and offered for rent within 5 years, the city has a provision that all of those units, 100%, are subject to the rent stabilization ordinance, unless the landlord gets an exemption for building affordable housing units. The way the ordinance is currently written, that exemption is granted if the number of affordable units is the number of units demolished or 20% of the newly constructed units, whichever is less. As we've gained experience with this, we think that's a problem because in some cases we can wind up with very few affordable units where there's a great increase in density. So our recommendation is that we change that to be at least the number of units demolished. Another option is
Or 20%.
or 20%.
Or whatever is greater.
Or it could be the number of units demolished or 20%, whichever is greater. Yeah, so there's several ways we could go about this. Also going with that, the current ordinance language calls for them to be affordable for 30 years, yet most of our affordable housing covenants are now for 55 years, so we think it should be for the time that the covenants are being written. And the current provision refers to the federal HUD levels of affordability. We think that should be the state of California affordability level. So those are 3 changes in the requirements to obtain an exemption from the rent stabilization ordinance for the future, for the newly constructed housing. So all of those things, there's 8 different things, are issues that could be amended and changed in the rent stabilization ordinance as soon as the council instructs the city attorney to write the ordinance and we come back with those amendments. That addresses a number of things that we've observed as we've processed these cases. There's a number of other issues that were in some of the motions that need further review and probably review by the city attorney, and we would have to work with the city planning department on and building and safety. Those have to do with disallowing demolition permits until the owner has obtained all discretionary construction approvals. There's also an ordinance on the books in section 12.95.2 of the LAMC that provides for a moratorium on condo conversions in community planning areas with less than 5% vacancy. So this is something that would need to be implemented through the planning department. There's also a proposal that maybe there should be an annual cap on demolition of RSO units. There's a request that we look at the impact of the small lot subdivision ordinance on the rent stabilized stock and the ALICE provisions. That would be something that we need to report back and more fully together with the planning department. And then we've looked at, we do have applications from time to time where landlords or property owners have removed residential apartments in order to convert them to hotel use. So one recommendation that the city should review is whether we should disallow conversions to transient or hotel use when there's an LS removal of RSO units. And finally, there's a number of provisions having to do with changes that would have to be implemented at the state level. None of these have gone through the legislative process this year, but that doesn't mean that the city shouldn't support them in any future legislation that might be considered. So things like families with children, maybe right now only certain tenants get a 1-year extension to stay in their rental units. Currently, the law provides for disabled citizens, residents, and disabled and senior citizens. Thank you, I blanked there. So they are able to request a 1-year extension. We've had discussions with the various rent control cities in the state, and all are in favor of supporting a 1-year extension for families with children in school, or it could be for all tenants once any tenant has exercised their right to have a 1-year extension. There's also an idea that landlords should notify all evicted tenants when they re-rent the property that's been removed. And there's also been attempts in the past to not allow an LS removal within 5 years of a purchase. That's to curb speculative purchases and LSing of properties. I think the city would probably want to support any and all of these if that opportunity were there in state legislation. So we've covered the gamut from things that we can do immediately by amending the RSO, things that are a little bit longer term that would take the cooperation of several departments, and I think further review about whether these are legally feasible, and then things that the city can support at the state level.
Okay, we'll start with, can we get let's get public comment up. Thank you, guys. So I've got multiple speakers. Carlos Aguilar. Antoinette Casita. And Bill Prisluki. Is that you, Bill? How do you say your last name? Prisluk?
However you want. Just do it. So just to clarify, we get 1 minute per item?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Carlos Aguilar, Coalition for Economic Survival. CES fully supports the tenant buyout agreement program. While discussing this ordinance has gone on, we've seen continued increase in these cash for keys cases. Landlord developer intimidation and pressure on tenants to accept the money and move persist. In the last week, we've been assisting tenants in Westlake, West Side, Valley Village, North Hollywood, Hollywood, and Los Feliz facing these tenant buyouts offers. Many tenants don't know their rights, and they believe they have no choice but to opt out, take the money, and leave. Unfortunately, we don't really know how widespread this problem is. We only know about cases that come to CES or other tenants' rights organizations or HCID. This ordinance will provide needed protections and a process for the buyouts that will hopefully stop this illegal activity. It's crucial that a copy of the detailed contract be filled with HCID to help tenants ensure the agreement's terms are upheld. We also want sufficient resources to make sure the new law is fully enforced, and we urge its adoption. I'll go to item 4. We really can't adequately address the affordable housing crisis as long as there's Ellis. We all know that. We support HCID's efforts and recommendations, but without preserving our existing RSO units, our efforts will fail. CES supports the CAO's recommendation number 1, and on recommendations 3 and 4, we support providing a 1-for-1 replacement or 20% of the new units, whichever is greater. While Ellis changes must come at the state level, the city can and should be doing more, using its land use powers to discourage development resulting in RSO unit loss. Let's increase incentives to develop on commercial, vacant, and city-owned land while discouraging development that destroys RSO units. The city should be also extending AB 2222 for 1-for-1 replacement requirements, amending the small lot subdivision ordinance, restricting condo conversions and demolitions that are steps that should be taken. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go with number 2 first.
Sure.
Correct. I actually am a tenant in the middle of an Ellis action in Venice, California. I have lived in my rent-controlled unit for 6 years, and if it wasn't for Power and my attorney, I would not know my rights. I wouldn't know my rights, and I wouldn't know how to move forward, and I wouldn't be educated. So I would strongly recommend to someone who has a personal experience going through this process that there is more education, especially for people that may not have the ability to go out and figure out, hey, who do I contact? How do I get more information? There seems to be a really big lack of information for people that are actually being forced to go through this process. My landlord, when I originally rented from the property, had owned the property for over 20 years. I want to say since 1994. The new owner owned the property for less than a year, and he is a speculative person. His intent on buying the property, which is the 1940s bungalows in Venice, California, was to tear it down and build $1 million condos for someone. So he's displacing people that have lived there. You know, some of my neighbors have lived there 20, 30, even 40 years. So it's hard because he's tearing up the integrity of our neighborhood and the look and feel of our neighborhood, and he's displacing people that are professionals that have lived, and artists that have lived in the neighborhood for years. So it's a huge detrimental impact, and we would not know how to go about this whole action and educate ourselves had we not reached out to people from not-for-profits and or the legal community. And that's a huge expense for some people, including myself. I had to reach out to an attorney to know better, and I would urge you to please consider some kind of measure to educate people throughout this process so they just don't hand the keys to the landlord without knowing their rights. So that's number 2. Number 4, as someone who has been going through this whole entire process.
I'm sorry you did your whole time.
I did my whole time. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Bill Przlecki, Executive Director of Power, People Organized for Westside Renewal. We do community organizing with tenants in RSO properties in the West Side and in the Valley. So, as you heard, Power simply doesn't have the resources to reach out to all tenants, and the whole nonprofit sector. We don't have the reach to get to everyone who needs to know this information. So we support anything that gets tenants information. We also received dozens of calls from people who have already left or already signed voluntary vacates, but are panicking because they have nowhere to go and want to know what to do. And we need better tools to be able to help folks who are in that situation. And voluntary vacate is a polite term, but we have seen many cases that are not voluntary and are not polite. We've seen tenants who've had their utilities shut off, who've had their windows painted black so they can't get any sunlight. We've seen tenants who have been harassed, have maintenance deferred. In the coastal zone especially, where we organize in Venice, this has led to the loss of affordable units that would be required to be replaced under the Mello Act. And so, just in general, on the second item, or item 4, we believe that there should be caps, that there should be stricter rules in areas with low vacancy rates, and that developers should be required to have entitlements in place before they can Ellis, especially where affordable replacement units would be required under laws such as the Mello Act in the coastal zone.
Thank you. Becky Dennison. Thelma Pettis. Mark Lipman. And somebody Malloy.
Margaret. Hi, I'm Becky Dennison. I work with Venice Community Housing. We are also in strong support of the both number 2 and number 4 with just a few additional comments. We develop affordable housing on the West Side, but we also have long worked with tenants to prevent displacement and gentrification of West Side communities. And just in our last meeting that we hosted of the West Side Tenant Coalition, I just happened to sit in while people were coming, and every single person walking in was brand new and had an Ellis notice or a verbal move-out notice. So the problem is definitely growing as the market heats back up, and especially in hot markets. So I hope that we'll move the tenant buyout notification program because it's pretty complete here very quickly and separate from the other recommendations. I do think, though, that enforcement is really key and that the RSO complaint process gets incorporated in here somehow, because right now when tenants complain about a cash for key, usually it's verbal, and usually the housing department can't do that much in that moment. So I hope that the enforcement process would also include this notification process and making sure that we can be really proactive when it's not followed. And just a couple pieces on the number 4. I really think it's important to add to the report and the instruction the whichever is greater, the number of units, okay, because it's not clear here, and that's the loophole that we definitely need to close from the last time around. And then the last piece is just, I really also hope that we would move forward the annual cap, not just as a research item, but as an item that we want to proceed with. It is incredibly critical we do that before we reach our peak again and lose as many units as we did. The legal analysis has been presented. There is precedent in other cities, so I don't think that needs more research, and I hope that we can move it in with the current recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Telmi Perez. I'm with the LA Human Right to Housing Collective as well as the Renters Day LA Coalition. I am also in strong support. We are in strong support of items number 2 and 4. I want to speak just to the opportunities that are presented with this Ellis, with the various Ellis motions. I think that it's really, really important as a city that we begin to explore how we can have really strict provisions around Ellis to ensure that our communities don't lose their flavor, don't lose their culture, and in particular do not lose their residents. We want to make sure that residents stay in place. I want to speak to the annual cap that Becky mentioned just a second ago. I'll also agree that it should not be a research item, but it should be something that's thoroughly vetted and that's neighborhood-based, and that we have very strong caps so that we can ensure that Ellis Act notices are not going out to the same neighborhood, but that are spread evenly across the city, and the fewer, the better. And I also want to say that we need to make sure also that HCID LA is increasing its educational process to residents. Right now, they are going above and beyond to instruct landlords on how to Ellis. This needs to stop. It's just sending the wrong message to our communities that that landlords should be Ellising in our neighborhoods. That's it.
Thank
45 seconds to go.
Sir.
Hi, my name is Mark Lippman with Westside Tenants Union and Power. I'm approached on a weekly and nearly daily basis by tenants who don't know their rights, who are being told, you have 30 days to move in. We want to move a relative in. We'll give you $3,000 for your keys or something like this. And people just don't know their rights. Ellis Act has been abused left and right to intimidate tenants into moving out. And most people just don't know what their options are. I think it's a terrible thing when we're destroying affordable housing, and for every person who gets evicted, whether that person or not, someone becomes homeless. The evictions that are happening are directly impacting us as an entire city, exasperating the situation of homelessness in our communities, and we need to do something about this. We need to stop these legal Ellis Act evictions, and we need to inform tenants what their rights are. If we don't do this base minimum of letting people know what their rights are, how are we going to have a future for anyone in our community? We have people throughout the city who are being illegally evicted on practically every day, and the court system is so overwhelmed with eviction cases. This is the loophole they use. They start eviction processes knowing that the evictions are illegal, but they know that the courts are so overwhelmed with these cases that the judges just want to get rid of the cases, and it always falls against the tenant. Every single time. People are being illegally evicted, and if we don't close these loopholes, it's just going to keep getting worse. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Margaret Malloy. I am representing myself. I support both of these motions. I believe that the most important thing we can do is have a mandatory registration of all buyouts. We have 70,000 evictions in the courts. Those are the ones that are on the books. There's so many cash for keys that are not on the books. A registration of all buyouts by both tenant and landlord would take care of the problem. It would just be an input system and a database. which could be called upon if it needed to be investigated. DMV does it. Every single car you sell, you sign, they sign. Why can't we do it for housing? So in Venice, we have just terrible violations, and one of them is a person who is lawyer, broker, and tax expert. That person has converted 5 entire apartment buildings into hotels. In an email chain with a person discussing a buyout, they said, I will give them a letter from a tax attorney. This will be a settlement of a claim and non-taxable. This is a very prominent person in our community. In Venice, we're in crisis. I'm asking you to look at the crisis. I plan to send you all, I've had internet problems today. I'm going to send you very specific examples. I can give you one example of a building. The owner claimed owner occupied, but every record, LA County Recorders, HCID, ZEMAS, LADBS, all showed a history of 2 units on the property, and that owner had the same address for 15 years before and for several years after their claim of owner occupied. Enforcement is an issue. Accountability is an issue. Cross-reference is an issue. The burden is on us as a community at the moment, and in Venice we are hemorrhaging.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jim Clark, Linda Hollenbeck, and Beverly Kentworthy on item 2.
Just 2 or 2?
2.
Just 2.
We're done with the multiples.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Clark, representing the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. I want to speak on item 2. Tenant buyout agreements have been in play for quite some time. They're instigated or introduced by both sides, either the tenant or the owner. We are here to agree with the tenant advocates that education is a big part of this, and we have no problem disseminating information with regard to tenants' rights and what they would be given in the situation of, with regard to removal under the RSO and those particular figures. However, education aside, this ordinance is requiring that a business transaction be filed with the housing department, and we have a bit of a problem with that. While we had discussions with the HCID, there was no follow-up with regard to an AGLA proposal to the tenants that would allow tenant buyout agreements amounts to be masked, and we would ask that that be done, and you strike the buyout agreement requirement, or the requirement to file the buyout agreements with the HCID, and revisit that portion. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Linda Hollenbeck. I'm an attorney with the law.
Linda, so you don't want the postings, the listings? So the last comment you said you want to redact the
It's the agreement. There's 2 things. There's a disclosure notice that gives the tenants their rights.
Jim, on the mic. You should be on the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. There are 2 pieces to this. There used to be one. The intent was to make sure that tenants understand their rights with regard to the buyouts and how much money they could get with regard to the structure in the RSO for relocation. Now, this piece also asks that the buyout agreement, the actual agreement, and the amount of the agreement be filed with the HCID, and we have a problem with that.
Right. So, and then my question is, so if the amount is redacted, do you still have a problem with the filing?
I'd have to revisit that with my group, but I would say probably not.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Again, my name is Linda Hollenbeck. I'm an attorney with the Office of Hollenbeck and Cardoso. I sit on the board of the California Apartment Association Los Angeles. I represent landlords and owners. I represent an awful lot of developers with regard to the Ellis Act. I spend all day, almost every day, in court. And number one, the courts are not so crowded that they can't handle their work. But with that said, This appears to be a continued constraint on the rights of property owners. A property owner has the right to do what they choose with their property as long as it's within the constraints of the law. And I agree with Jim. I think the problem here is strictly education. The tenants need to be educated as to their rights. But the contracts are a private agreement between two private citizens, and it has no business being in the hands of the city regardless. To me, I don't agree with just redacting the amount. I think that the contract should remain between the two parties. It's nothing to do with the city. It's really none of their business as long as the landlord and owner is following the law.
Hi. Beverly Kenworthy with the California Apartment Association. Again, I agree with our speakers. You know, the tenant education component and knowing their rights.
Ask you zero in on this question. If the amount is redacted, do you have a problem with filing?
I think we'd have to take that back to our members. I think, unfortunately, you know, we only the landlords met with the housing department. We were supposed to have a meeting with the RSO working group, which we did not. So I wasn't even aware that this was coming up today until I got the notice on Friday. So, you know, that's a further discussion. Right now, we just think that's a step too far. City of Santa Monica doesn't require it. It's just I don't see where the city needs that information. That's all.
Quick question here. Mm-hmm. So when two people that are in the ownership class make an agreement to exchange property in consideration for property, it's completely public. And the price is public. So I'm curious as to why in this particular transaction there's this insistence that it be private.
Oh, okay. Well, number one, if something is public, it's because that's what the law is. When you own property, it's recorded, and that's a public transaction. A contract between two individuals, two private citizens, it has always been a private matter, and it should remain a private matter. Again, as long as the tenants are educated. I think that's the biggest thing. People who are engaging in these contracts need to be educated. They need to know what their rights are. I absolutely, you know, I certainly don't agree with anybody who tries to take advantage of someone. That's not what I ever do. That's not what my clients do. And I would advise any tenant, again, the law is the law, and it goes on both sides. But it's a matter of educating somebody so that if they do enter into that agreement, they know exactly what they're doing and they know what their rights are, so that they know they're getting what their rights are and then what they're getting in excess of their rights. They need to make sure they are not getting something that they are not afforded. But as long as they are given that information, and we can all feel confident that the tenants entering into these agreements know what their rights are, then I think the rest of the agreement should be kept confidential.
Understood.
If I may. Jim? Yeah. Councilmember Harris Dawson, we have situations where we have our members actually buying out tenants who are nuisance tenants, and instead of going through an eviction process that might cost $15,000, they'll offer them $10,000 to leave. We would rather not see, you know, those contracts be public for fear that people might take advantage of owners who are willing to do that.
Understand. Strong public policy precedent on that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Seems to me probably somewhere in between makes sense. Obviously, we understand that we want to make sure tenants aren't accepting $2,000 when their rights would give them $10,000. At the same time, I suspect occasionally there are landlords that make an agreement and then violate it. So I see the logic to having HCID have the document. I don't see any justification for making that amount available to the general public. So the question is, can we legally do that? Because I think there is some policy reason that why we would want to possess the document, and there's also a policy reason why we wouldn't want that available to the general public. But if the housing department needed to get involved and enforce lack of follow through on the agreement, we would probably want to possess the document. So I suspect if we're allowed to do that, even though you may not be able to speak for your organizations today, that seems eminently reasonable to me, as long as what would actually cause you harm is not allowed to take place.
Right. Got it. There's a,
I'm sorry, I'm still struggling with this. So, in the scenario that you described where unusual agreement is made because there are particular circumstances that might not be reflected in the document between the owner and the renter, and the renter signs off on this agreement, under the scenario that you're describing, would the renter be penalized for making that agreement public? In other words, if the renter said, I want to take this agreement that I just signed with this owner, and I'm going to put it on Facebook, and everybody look at what I got.
Generally, there's a confidentiality provision in something like that.
So you would have a confidentiality.
Right.
Got it.
And one other thing, too, if, every day in court, we do stipulations. Almost 90% of the cases end up in a stipulation. And today, all of the tenants' rights groups that represent the tenants in court generally ask for money when the tenant is not entitled to it by law. Many owners do provide that money. They give $2,000, $5,000, sometimes $10,000. And those documents, I'm going to say 99% of them, maybe 95, are the record is sealed. Those cases are not available for the public unless you're a party to that contract. That's basically a contract. And you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of those, which would be no different than cash for keys that nobody is ever entitled to see.
Okay.
You said 95%. How about the other 5? What happens? You say they are reviewed.
The record is sealed. Is all
Why is
that.
it just
The parties don't always seal the record.
But the vast majority are always sealed.
The vast majority, when there's money involved, and again, it's at the tenant's request that the case is sealed for other reasons.
Right. Okay, we got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I've got. Still have more discussion, John Gerardo. Please come up, and then same subject matter, item 4. Carla Portillo, Cafra Talori.
John. 2 and 4, Mr. Cedillo, for John?
No, John is, yes, I think John is 2 and 4.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yes. So go ahead. And then 1, 2, 3, got 2 more seats. You are?
Carla?
Carla. And then Cafra. Cafra here? Come on up. Item 3? No, 2 or 4?
Item 3.
Okay, you're off. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. It just said 4. Carla, Mark Simon, and Walt Centerfit. Walt, what's your last name?
Centerfit. In the center.
Okay. Got it. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is John Harada. I'm a member of CES. I wanted to provide comment on items number 2 and 4. I actually take exception as someone who has gone through and is currently going through a tenant buyout situation, that this is only about education. It's about enforcement and compliance also. Just a little bit over a month ago, a neighbor of mine was offered a sum of money by my landlord. They signed the paperwork, they moved out. After they moved, their landlord refused to pay them the sum of money. And they're so deep-pocketed as a real estate investment firm that the tenants who moved out have little recourse. What are they going to do to go after the landlord for money? We also have seen our landlord engage with a third-party tenant relocation assistant who has said things like, hey, if you guys don't want to get taxed on the money, you can provide, a false social security number. And again, there's no way to report this, and we don't have a mechanism to actually make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. So I actually do think that this is much more than education. It's much more than process. It's about enforcement. It's about compliance. It's about making sure that the appropriate civil penalties are there for those that do violate these proposed measures. So I'm actually in support of these measures as a great starting point.
Thank you. Carla.
Hi, my name is Carla. I'm a member of CES, and I'm here today with my mom. I've been living in a building of 8 units on James Wood and Hoover for 21 years. In June, we received an unlawful eviction letter from the landlord who has owned the building for only 2 years, giving us 90 days to move out. We learned that this was illegal under the rent control law, especially because it did not offer us any relocation money. After the tenants organized and did not move out, the landlord did file an Ellis Act eviction to demolish our building and plans to develop a 33-unit luxury. This is impacting myself, family, and neighbors because we are being forced out of our neighborhoods where rent are no longer affordable. Our current rent is $675. It's impossible to find a unit under $1,000. Whatever improvements can be done by the city to enhance the protection of renters, we support.
Thank you. Sir? See you.
Yes, hi. Walt Centerfit. I was a victim of an unjust Ellis eviction, which we are fighting right now with the help of CES and other organizations. But in the meantime, in terms of fighting ourselves, we also helped found the Los Angeles Tenants Union, an all-volunteer tenants movement that's growing across the city. It has 5 locals, 5 other organizing committees, and over 600 members in less than 15 months, all with volunteers. We are supporting the need for you to take strong action against the Ellis Act as one of the many things going on that is causing the destruction and loss of affordable housing. So we would say this is a good start. But in addition to that, I ask you today or at the time it goes to the City Council to do 3 other things. 1, include these 5 optional, not yet to be investigated items, including the caps, in your report and in your instructions for meetings. 2, put some teeth into enforcement and consider how to do those things, including removing a cap on attorney's fees, including penalties for landlords who are found to have violated and abused this system. And 3, in terms of changing the state law, go ahead and put on position go ahead and say not just that we will support it, but we want to instruct the lobbyists in Sacramento to work with other cities to take action to actually get something moving in the next session of the legislature. In the meantime, the Ellis provides you to have the authority to use your land use regulatory powers to prevent the misuse and of Ellis that is happening rampantly across our city. So you've got to use it.
Hi, Mark Simon. I'd just like to second what Walt said and second it very strongly about putting teeth to the enforcement. I, too, am a victim of an Ellis eviction, 23 years in my home. And in a 12-unit building with various people. Now, I was one of the quote-unquote lucky ones because I was am a senior, being evicted after 23 years. I was given a year, but there were many other people in the 12 units who'd lived there 19 years, who'd lived there 22 years, and were not seniors. And they were told to leave their homes in 4 months. It's kind of, brutal. And so I would certainly like to see that 1-year enforcement because it doesn't, these long-term evictions don't just affect seniors. And also, again, teeth to the enforcement. The landlord I'm dealing with is so clearly in flagrant violation of the Ellis. Of my 12-unit building, I believe 10 of them in less than a year are retenanted. Without any application for use.
Thank you. We have Sylvie Shane. Last public comment, Sylvie Shane, items 2 and 4 or item 4?
2 and 4, please. Sylvie Shane, member of the LA Tenants Union and CES. In regards to the buyout agreements, I support a lot of what's been said. They have a disparate impact on people who don't have money, who don't have access to information. So to say that information is going to cure that is unrealistic, and this is a major public interest issue. So that process being able to be watched by the city is incredibly important, and that includes being privy to the information with regards to the amounts. with regards to Ellis, there's a couple issues I want to bring up. One is that the way that the Ellis law has been written leaves some matters that are undefined. For example, withdrawal. There's largely a question: when does withdrawal start? Is it from when the notice is filed with the city, or when it's actually vacated? And because there are certain time limits that are triggered by that, I think it would behoove the city to define that concretely. Also, I think it's important to preclude short-term rentals, and that includes even hotel uses. And that's because right now, within the hospitality industry, there's a extended stay concept, and that would basically be in violation of Ellis residential re-rental provisions. Additionally, hotels are considered a residential use in the city's planning process. So there's a problem with that use under the restrictions of Ellis. Enforcement's key. There's an issue with this notion of reoccupying previously Ellis properties, but skirting the re-rental provisions by saying that there are no leases or there's no money being exchanged. So I would ask if you could request for some sort of investigation into whether or not, with building and safety, occupancy certificates can be removed, because Ellis is not supposed to be used for an owner occupancy. There's a method already with the city to be able to do that. The point of Ellis is to take the building off the market so it's not occupied. So if the occupancy certificate were to be removed, that kind of abuse would be precluded as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Bowers, last comment.
Thanks for this opportunity. I'm the last tenant in a building that has been bought, and they have not Ellised. Instead, they've very aggressively attempted to buy everyone out using what is like a sort of a signature squeeze method, where on the one hand, they're taking the tenant to court over something, and on the other hand, they're offering something. And it's worked for everyone but me, 7 people. Anyway, I just generally support reevaluating how you do things with Ellis and tightening up enforcement. Tenants don't really know their rights, and so they were the owners were very successful in getting everyone out for small amounts, and then some above, but they started as low as $2,000, and people, I guess to them that seemed like a lot of money. Anyway, so I totally support your work in taking a closer look at Ellis and upping the enforcement, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Stephen, good luck. All right. Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First on number 4, I thought I might have to convince people, but it seems like everybody is in sync on the idea of either doing 20% or 1-for-1 replacement, whichever is greater. So I would certainly be in support of that.
Support that, Mr. Harris Dawson? Yes, sir. Okay.
I
do as well.
I also think we do, as I said earlier, need to put the substitute for Ellis agreements on the record. I think the department should possess them, but I don't see any value in making them public, and a lot of problems with it. So I think as a reasonable compromise, if we can redact those but possess them, so we can verify that those agreements are being followed, I think that pretty much works for everybody, and I would recommend that as well. I think we do need to continue to look at Ellis further. I think it's been completely abused since it was first proposed. It was essentially proposed so that mom and pop landlords that were taking in $3,000 a month in rent and spending $4,000 and were actually losing money on operating their property could take their property off the market. I wasn't necessarily thrilled with that when it was proposed at the time, but at least there was some logic. Now I think it's being totally abused by property speculators that are buying up one property after another and evicting the tenants. So I think we need to continue to pursue state legislation and to continue to look at our own rules to see if there are things we can tighten up. and I would encourage us to do both. I know there are a number of suggestions that were made that haven't been followed through yet, but were alluded to, so I hope we continue looking at those. Particularly, I made a motion which is in Council File 15-0728, and I hope we'll continue to look at those in the next few months and bring back suggestions on how we tighten up all these elements in the city and things that we appropriately should lobby for at the state level.
Let me add to that mix that contracts should be written in the language of the tenants. That doesn't matter how great the contract is if you don't know what it says. It doesn't help. Okay. So that's good. You don't disagree with anything, Mr. Koretz?
I'm in good shape.
Awesome. So let's move forward with adopting the ordinance as amended. You have those amendments? Yeah, as amended. Increase the time allowed for the landlord to file the buyout agreement from 30 to 60 days. Go forthwith to the city council. Adopt CAO report as amended to require the number of affordable housing units provided is at least equal to the number of the RSO units withdrawn, or at least 20% of the new constructed units, whichever is greater. We want to direct HCID, Planning, Building and Safety, and the CA, the city attorney, to report to the committee in 90 days on the 5 issues for further review discussed on page 10 of the HCID report, forthwith to the city council. Does that cover it? Got a motion?
Yes, it is.
Second.
Second. Objections? So be the order. Okay.
I'm with you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, would you like to go to item number 3? Item number 3, HCID and CAO reports relative to the selection of developers for affordable housing projects related to the disposition and development of 13 city-owned properties.
Okay. Yeah, Tommy, I haven't seen you for a while. Okay.
Good afternoon. HID is requesting authority to sell. Oh, did you have to read out the thing?
No, I already did.
Okay. HID is requesting authority to select developers for 13 affordable housing developments based on a request for qualifications and proposals process and various actions related to city-owned property. The Office of the CAO concurs with most of their recommendations. However, HID is requesting to write off a loan between the former Community Redevelopment Agency of Los Angeles and Heritage Housing Partners for $509,593 with an outstanding balance of $264,347.76. Our office actually recommends that HCID report back after on their efforts to obtain missing loan documentations and to collect on the outstanding balance before the council considers writing off the outstanding loan. And there are representatives from HCID here to provide additional information and answer any questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Helmi Hisarick, Assistant General Manager for the Housing Development Bureau at HCID. And I just wanted to give a few remarks before I hand it over to Manuel Bernal, the Housing Director who managed this program and is going to provide the details. What you have before you is recommendations by the department to enter into exclusive negotiating agreements with 13 developers for publicly owned sites primarily that we inherited as from the redevelopment agency's dissolution when the housing department became the successor housing agency. And just to remind you, we inherited in 2013 approximately 650 loans, 23,000 covenants, and 60 properties. And the process of inheriting all of these assets from the redevelopment agency has been a complex process of evaluating every single file and every single parcel that we received. It was as we've inherited the properties, we've been going through the disposition of those properties in accordance with existing contracts. And there remain about 30 properties that needed to be disposed of through new contracts or new development agreements. We identified the first group of these to be made available for development. There's 13 properties that we put out to bid. Having come from the redevelopment agency in the past myself, I want to just mention that making 13 publicly owned sites available at one time is a pretty large undertaking. The value of the land is about $39 million, and that is it's actually greater than the Affordable Housing Trust funds in any given year. So this is a very large opportunity to provide the equivalent of cash for affordable housing in the form of land. And doing this many sites all at once is larger than I've ever seen done, even by the redevelopment agency when it existed. It was done by our department, by a mighty team of small land development team, which was managed by Manuel Bernal, the housing director, Mariana Lem, who was the unit manager, and the staff is here. And I'd actually just like them to stand up so you could see who's here.
Very good work. Good job.
They do deserve. This is the same team that actually did review over 20,000 files from the redevelopment agency, and then they turned their sights to the land and really have been focused on that. Our goal is to requirement under redevelopment law is to initiate development activity on these sites by March 27th, 2018. So we are actively pursuing entering into exclusive negotiating agreements, and we'll be communicating that to the state so that they are aware we are meeting our deadlines.
What is the deadline?
March 27th, 2018. So the deadline is essentially, as the housing assets were transferred to the city, we are the successor. We actually have to prove that we are converting the assets into affordable housing. And so by March 27th of 2018, we have to demonstrate development activity on these sites. Now, by entering into an exclusive negotiating agreement with a developer and having a development plan in place, we will have met that objective. We're going to come, bless you. We're going to meet that on these sites that we have in front of you. If you accept the recommendation, and then we will also be coming forward with an additional 8 sites in the future that would also have to meet that same deadline.
Quick question, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Quick question, quick.
So just so we have an idea of the scope of this, how many units are we talking about in these 13 sites?
Well, I'm glad you asked. That's my next. So we're 611 affordable homes, of which 204 would be permanent supportive housing units, 309 will be affordable housing, but not specifically for the homeless, and 98 would be home ownership sites targeted to first-time home buyers, low-income first-time home buyers. So it's a variety of different project types. I will say that going into this, the staff looked at the historical record of the redevelopment agency, so we knew what had been planned for the site, and worked with the council offices to identify the path forward. And so the scoring criteria included a request for qualification, so we qualified the developers, and we also did a request for proposals simultaneously where we looked at the proposed plan by the developer. The developers that we selected, we know that there will be, as usual in this type of process, critiques of the process and folks that have their reactions to how the scores have come out. But I will say that as a manager, I actually participated in the appeals process. I felt it was important for me to stay out of the decision-making process and to involve myself really in looking at the appeals. And I came away from this recognizing that the staff conducted an extraordinarily fair and consistent decision-making process across all the properties. I feel confident that the proposals that they're putting in front of you are a group of developers that will really deliver quality projects throughout the city.
Mr. Chairman, quick question. And talk about the review panels. I mean, didn't you bring in some experts, subject matter experts, to come in and be a part of that process? That was kind of impressive about the thoroughness and the transparency in this process.
So I'm going to turn it over to the folks who actually did all the hard work.
Good afternoon. Manuel Bernal, Housing Director for the City of Los Angeles Housing Department. I'll get to that answer in a second. Let me back up a little bit. So on mid of April of this year, April 18th, I think to be exact, we released the RFQ. We thought that 90 days would be a reasonable time to give developers to respond. So our deadline was July 6th. So they had a little bit less than 90 days. As soon as we released the RFQ, we emailed, must have sent at least 1,000 emails to different groups within the community development community, affordable housing community, as well as posting the RFQ in LA Babin. So as a result of all this kind of outreach, we did receive 36 proposals on July 6th, like I mentioned.
Did you expect more or less than that?
No, we expected around 36. I think we thought if we get 3 proposals per site, we're in good shape. So that was actually a pretty good number to hit. While the developers were preparing their responses, we were at work at the department strategizing and going back to your question, Councilman Price, about the strategy we were going to use to evaluate essentially 36 proposals at the same time for 13 different sites. So what we did is that we grouped and we collected and we assembled a dedicated team of affordable housing professionals, both internal to HCID, as well as the larger city family and some people from the outside as well, all of which have extensive experience in affordable housing development and working with the city. So there were approximately 50 individuals that participated in this review. So what we did is, because we had 13 different sites, we had 13 different groups, each one per site, and each group was at least three people big, or as large probably as 4 or 5. 5 was the largest group. So the process that we followed was to have each individual member of a group review the binder, the application on their own, independent of each other, and then once they had a score for that project, they came together and they developed a consensus score for that site. And that took place between July 13th, almost just 6 days after the applications were due, and within 45 days, we had the initial scores. So by August 23rd, we had the final score, the initial scores, and when we let out letters to all our responders about their scores. We also, at the same time, informed them of their right to appeal. So we gave them about a week and a half to submit their appeals, if any. We actually ended up receiving 12 appeals, and as Helmy mentioned, we set up a different committee, an appeals committee headed by Helmy, and that also included both internal staff and external staff, external folks, to be part of that appeals process. The appeals committee was very dedicated. They invested a lot of time. Like every time I would walk through Helmy's office, I would see them there. So it was a very lengthy, a very thorough review. And within 10 days, they had final scores. So by September 30th, we were done with the appeals process, and we were essentially started writing the transmittal to come and present to you. I want to say that really jump a little bit ahead. The next steps really are to, once if we do receive approval, then we want to go ahead and execute what we're calling exclusive negotiating agreements with the developers. What that will do is that will launch that will start the communication or crafting of the actual project. that will involve communication between ourselves as a department, the developer, the community, and the council offices, and together craft projects that really make sense for everybody. And that's what the ENA process is supposed to do. So we're giving ourselves 12 months. We don't think it's going to take 12 months. We think it's actually going to vary by project. Some are easier than others, but within at the latest 12 months, then we will then jump into a DDA, a Disposition and Development Agreement, because at that point we'll know all the details of each project, and that will then give the developer formal site control of the site to develop that project or those projects that have been communally devised by all of us. So we're asking for authority for both to execute the ENA and then jump into a DDA once we all agree that that's the project, those are the projects we want to do.
Thank you.
There's one little caveat, and that is that for one project located in CD 12, Geyser, that one we're asking for the authority to move directly into a DDA because that project currently is a single-family house. It was used as a group home, it's got a kind of covenant as a group home. It can't be anything more than a group home, so why go through the DNA process? Let's just go directly into a DDA.
Got it.
And that's it.
Which one was that one?
That's Geyser, CD 12. The street name is Geyser.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Public comment? Shauna Grace, Kaifa Soler, and Carol Terosian. Shauna?
I simply want to thank HCID LA staff and all of you. I'm here on behalf of NHS and Works, which is I think, number 2 on the list.
Yep.
And we're going to do home ownership housing. And we're pleased that we were selected, and we hope we will be able to skip over the long, protracted time on the ENA and move to the DDA. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, council members. I'm here today to file a protest against staff recommendation for disposition of the city-owned properties, specifically item number 3 on the list of recommendation located at 2375 Washington Boulevard in Council District 10. My protest is focused on 2 issues: the process and the scope. The process. Each state violated its own process by being less transparent in the communication of the results of the RFP queue. On April 18, 2016, each state issued the aforementioned RFQ with a submission date of July 6. The RFQ provided specific submission guidelines, and we followed those guidelines to the letter. We provided a cover letter to the RFQ with introductions of all the development team members and provided contact information for each member.
That's your time, sir. We have your
written comments.
We have your letter. We just received it.
Good.
Which will give us an opportunity to review it and reconsider if we're compelled.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carol.
Honorable Chair, Council Members, Carl Terosian, Planning Director for Council Member Paul Kokorian. I wanted to thank you guys and thank the HCID staff for the great work that they've done in this process. We are very excited for the project on Elmer Street in Council District 2. It's been a blighted vacant lot for many years, and we have the opportunity to, working with Habitat for Humanity, to put low-income veteran families into that site to be future homeowners. So we're excited, and we ask that the site move as quickly as possible through the process. We've already started the dialogue with the community members since this report's come out, and this has full support, and we look forward to having a groundbreaking soon.
Thank you, sir.
And having those families in the house.
Thank you a lot. I've got Margaret Malloy, and then that's the end of public comment.
Hello. I just want to talk about the process because developers in Venice, I only know Venice, but I know it like the back of my hand. A lot of people who present as community concerned or philanthropic are doing really backhanded things, that are hurting our housing situation. And so I think that there needs to be a community vetting process in the beginning stages of what you're doing so that you hear from the community if they have concerns about the developers who are submitting their RFPs. I guarantee you, the people who would present as, stellar members of the community often have egregious backgrounds in the community. A lot of them are exactly what we just looked at, Ellis violations, cash for keys. We don't want those developers developing the affordable housing. We don't want them given that opportunity. And community input would be viable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, before we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask that we amend this proposal to pull the property located on the 3600 block of Vermont, the former Bethune Library, and revisit it at a later date.
Got it. So that's a motion to adopt the CA report as amended by Council District 8. That's what you were putting forth?
Yes.
Forthwith to Council. Second? Second. We're good? No objections? Matter resolved. You got your amendment. Meeting adjourned. We've satisfied public comment and Brown Act.